Dr. Karner because he is a product of UC Davis, where, you know, I spent most of my career until coming to the glorious institution of Georgia Tech 2 years ago. So Alex was in my discrete choice modeling class. And in fact, those of you who've had my discrete choice modeling class here, or will have it, will see Alex's fingerprints on all the homework assignments, because he was an early adopter of R, and I tell people in the class, you know, I know LibDep. I've given you LibDep scripts to make it, you know, easy on you, but you know, you can use any software package you want that'll do what I'm asking you to do. So Alex was into R, and he said, I want to use R, and so he literally did every homework assignment in LibDep and in R to make sure he got the same answer, and he documented the R scripts and left them for future generations of students to benefit from. And so that's helped a lot.
We appreciate that.
Exactly. So see, murmurs of appreciation already. Alex had a life before UC Davis. He was an undergrad in civil engineering at the University of Toronto. I guess you are an Canadian, if I'm not giving away any secret. But came to Davis, and we were delighted at that. And then after finishing his PhD with Dr. Niemeyer at UC Davis, went on to Arizona State, where he was for 2 postdocs, 1.5 or so.
Yeah.
And I'm thrilled that we snagged him here, because I think he's great, and I know
Me
he's
too.
going to help with the team. So wonderful colleague to join the driving transportation group that we have here. So Alex, looking forward to it.
Great, thanks, Beth. Then my early forays into R were, I think they sort of foreshadowed my commitment to open source software development and public data sources, so hopefully you'll see kind of shadows of that here today. So I just want to thank everyone for coming. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces. I decided to talk about something that I haven't talked about before, because Ram said it was okay to sort of try out sort of experimental material, maybe stuff that isn't fully done. So it's work that I've been conducting with a collaborator at UC Santa Cruz, Dr. Chris Benner. And our goal for the work is to use new data sources to both shed light on and encourage action on problems of housing affordability. And we want to do that by highlighting the environmental implications of policies and practices that restrict affordable housing supply. So one major thing I'm going to do in the course of the talk is operationalize a measure of jobs housing fit that's going to identify locations that are performing poorly on affordable housing if they have a high concentration of low-wage jobs but don't provide enough affordable housing for that low-wage workforce. And that carries with it not only social equity implications, because those low-wage workers probably can't locate close to their jobs, but there are also commute distance implications, BMT implications, and greenhouse gas implications. So I'll show some kind of preliminary modeling work that we've done to try to quantify the magnitude of that effect. The intellectual basis of this work comes from Jobs Housing Fit. Should I try to stay in front of the camera, or does it matter if I...
You can move around, it's all right. Yeah.
I like to walk. So, in the late 80s, Bob Severo started to do a number of studies looking at jobs housing balance. So he was thinking about, okay, if there are suburban locations that have a sort of rough balance between the number of jobs and the number of housing units, do we get improved transportation outcomes? And he found that indeed that was the case. So we got lower congestion in areas that were more balanced, higher non-motorized mode share, these sort of transportation outcomes that we like to see. There was subsequent debate. So people like Jen Giuliano and Anthony Downs came in and they said, well, I don't know if we really need to sort of promote jobs housing balance as a matter of policy. We think that areas naturally tend towards balance. So Bob Severo comes in. He did work showing that this idea of natural balance was in fact illusory. So he looked at places in the Bay Area that had sort of tended towards balance over the 1980s, but showed that in fact a lot of the workers that were employed there didn't actually live in those places. So we could have balance, but that apparent balance can mask a fit if the housing that's available in a local area can't be afforded by the local workforce. So he started to point to that as a problem, and that's where we kind of jump in. So by way of overview and kind of to lay out the argument of my talk here, I'm going to argue that this idea of jobs housing fit is more potent than jobs housing balance. So it sort of sheds light on problems of housing affordability much more readily than jobs housing balance does. We haven't been able to do a good job of operationalizing jobs housing fit in the past, largely because of data limitations that I won't really go into. If folks are interested, I'm happy to talk about this with you offline. The Census Transportation Planning Package is one data set that's been used to look at this stuff in the past, but it doesn't do a very good job. There are some new data sources that Chris and I are using. That facilitate the study of fit and make the links to sustainability and equity outcomes. And I think that piece is pretty important. You know, we often talk about sustainability as sort of comprising three components: environment, economy, and equity. We're really good on the environment, we're really good on the economy in terms of operationalizing, but that social equity piece is a little more slippery. I think there are a number of reasons for that, but I see my work as kind of giving a little bit more weight to that social equity component and tying it into environmental sustainability as well. So I am going to look at low-wage jobs in particular and affordable housing fit. So you could make the argument that fit is important at all housing levels, but I'm going to make the argument that it's most important for low-wage workers, and that's where I'm going to focus my energy. I think it's clear that low-wage workers have a stronger preference for affordability. So saving $1 on housing costs, or saving $1 on transportation costs is going to be much more important for low-wage workers than higher-wage workers, because that value of the dollar saved is very high. Lower-income workers are also more likely to drive older, more polluting automobiles. So to the extent that we can reduce their travel needs, we might get a sort of more bang for our buck in terms of environmental benefits. And there are very real barriers to affordable housing, things like exclusionary zoning policies or density limits that are definitely unjust, even if they're not sort of written or implemented with a discriminatory intent. There was a recent Supreme Court case whose name I can't remember, but the Supreme Court basically found the same thing. It said these barriers to housing affordability are unjust if they have a disparate impact on low-income people, even if there's no exclusionary intent. So I see my work is kind of fitting in there. I'm going to show results for California. Note that the data that I use, the methods that I employ, can be implemented basically anywhere in the country. But California is unique for a number of reasons. I did my PhD there, so I'm sort of most familiar with the geographic context. My students in my class are schooling me every single day about the local context in Georgia, so I still have quite a bit to learn, and I look forward to that. But a lot of my work is sort of focused on California. California has a number of quirks, one of which is Proposition 13. Proposition 13 was a voter initiative that was passed in the late 1970s, and it basically capped property taxes. It capped the rate of increase of property taxes at 1% per year. This had a big impact on local jurisdictions. Property taxes are a very important source of revenue, and this sort of tied the hands of jurisdictions. They could no longer increase property taxes to increase revenue. So it changed the incentives for residential versus commercial development. So now in California, jurisdictions really want to attract commercial development because it brings in sales taxes and property taxes, but doesn't have demands on services. So you don't have to have more schools or more fire departments to serve sort of commercial development. Whereas with residential development, especially affordable residential development, you're often providing a subsidy, also have to provide schools, water, fire, infrastructure, etc. There's a final piece that I don't think is unique to California, and that's that there's an aversion to affordable housing in prosperous communities. So I've got one example here. This is just a clipping from the San Jose Mercury News about an affordable housing project that was proposed in Danville. And there, unhappy residents warned that low-income, high-density housing could be more traffic and crime for Danville. Okay, these people definitely just don't want affordable housing, but they kind of trot out these arguments every time that an affordable housing development is proposed to oppose it. So again, my work, trying to bring in that environmental sustainability component, is saying, look, there are in fact real benefits to affordable housing that we want to take into consideration. Additional reasons to focus on California is that we're already seeing, the title of my talk is The Convergence of Social Equity and Environmental Sustainability. We're already seeing this take place in California under its sort of suite of climate change laws. So California passed a bill to limit its greenhouse gas emissions. There was a companion bill called Senate Bill 535 that takes some of the money raised from the cap and trade revenue for greenhouse gas emissions and directs that revenue to benefit disadvantaged communities. Now, it's not clear in the law what a disadvantaged community is, what a benefit would be, what types of projects they should support. So my work sort of speaks to the idea that we can identify places with poor fit, we can provide better transit service for those communities, and we can potentially provide more affordable housing in areas that need it. There are also some unique challenges in the Bay Area. I hope that folks have heard about things like the Google buses. People know about sort of rampant property price increases in San Francisco, concerns about gentrification and displacement. It seems like there are protests there every single day around this stuff. So a lot of my results are focused on the Bay Area because we're kind of familiar with the political economy of affordable housing there. Now the state already tries to build affordable housing in places that need it through a policy called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. So the Regional Housing Needs Allocation assigns housing needs to jurisdictions in 4 income categories: very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. And the goal is that the numbers are sort of set at the state level and they kind of trickle down to the regions and to the cities and counties. The goal is to make sure that growth in all of these income categories is shared equitably across the state. So they want to increase housing supply. They want to encourage the consideration of housing supply at all of these income levels. The recent iterations of RENA have started to consider greenhouse gas reduction goals. So they're putting a lot of the new housing into areas that are well served by high quality transit. But there's also a piece that recognizes that we need to do more to provide affordable housing in sort of suburban high opportunity areas as well. RENA is problematic for a number of reasons. One is that there's consistent underperformance, especially in the lower income categories. So this is a table, I'm just going to highlight a few cities here. What we've got on this table is RENA performance over the 2007-2014 period. The RENA numbers are here in this column in each of the 4 income categories. So very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. And these are the building permits issued in that category over the time period. And then the percent of the RENA that was actually met. So for these cities, Dublin, Fremont, Livermore, and Pleasanton, these are sort of Bay Area suburban cities, we can see that their RENA percentage met for the very low category is very low, 5%, 7%, 17%. Low is also very low. But for the above moderate category, it's very high, okay? Often exceeding 100%. So many cities, many of these suburban areas that have problems with providing affordable housing are not building the affordable housing that they need, okay? So RENA can sort of highlight that this is a problem, but doesn't exactly tell us what to do about it. It also doesn't allocate housing numbers based on the location of low-wage jobs. It considers total jobs as sort of one component of many, but doesn't try to match where low-wage jobs are located to the amount of housing that's needed. So the last thing I'll talk about here, to sort of convince you that this stuff matters, if I haven't already, is that one of the cities that I just showed, Pleasanton, tried to, in fact, did enact a housing cap. So Pleasanton voters in 1996 said, we are going to cap the number of housing units that we have in our town at 29,000. We're not going to build any more than 29,000 units. That was passed by voters in 1996 and affirmed in 2008. When it came time to update their general plan in 2005, the housing cap came right up against the RENA allocation. So it wasn't possible for Pleasanton to zone enough land to build the numbers of housing units that were required under RENA. And so this put their general plan in direct violation of state law. Okay, so that's enough potentially to invalidate their general plan. What was more problematic was that they also predicted robust job growth over that same time period. So they wanted to double their number of jobs from 2005 to 2025. So they were going to have 105,000 jobs by the end of that planning period, but still only have 29,000 housing units. Bring in Jerry Brown, 2-time governor of California, then Attorney General. He wrote a strongly worded letter to the city of Pleasanton saying that you have a shortfall in affordable housing and the general plan update doesn't curtail the problem. So he's sort of going beyond just the argument that there's a contradiction between the plan and state law and saying that this imbalance will force more local employees to find housing in distant communities, create more sprawl, lead to more emissions, and increase dependence on foreign oil, and that is not acceptable. So Jerry Brown starts to make this connection between jobs, housing balance, and environmental outcomes in his letter, even though he didn't necessarily have to, which I thought was pretty great. So Urban Habitat, a nonprofit advocacy organization, sues City of Pleasanton, alleging this violation of state housing law. The housing cap is invalidated. in 2010, and pledges orders to implement non-illusory zoning changes to address the housing shortfall. In other words, their housing element has to actually zone enough property to accommodate the RENA numbers. Now, it's important to note that the RENA numbers only say that you have to zone to meet them. It doesn't say that you actually have to build that housing. That's another reason why RENA is pretty weak. So, RENA, as I mentioned, is weak for a number of reasons. It's sort of one policy that the state has for increasing affordable housing where it's needed. It doesn't seem to be working well. So what my work is trying to do is to use better data and some more sophisticated methods to understand this problem and to really make the environmental case that we can do a better job at building affordable housing where it's needed. And we were motivated in this work through contact with people that are working on this issue every day. So a lot of my work is motivated through contact with people sort of working for civil rights, people working for transportation justice, people working for affordable housing, and a lot of the colleagues that I work with similarly have these connections. So this was sort of no different. We partnered up with affordable housing advocates, civil rights folks, and climate change advocates, mostly in Northern California. And they were concerned with identifying jurisdictions that have this imbalance between low-wage jobs and affordable housing units. They wanted something that they could use easily, could inform their advocacy, so we could have a map that sort of points to specific areas that are problematic, and that can be updated over time as new data become available. So we can sort of track progress towards better fit or away from fit, and in fact, poor fit. So I'm going to talk about 3 related efforts that I've been undertaking. Ron said I could talk about maximum 2, but I think that they're all sort of based on the same data sets, but come at the problem in slightly different ways. So the first piece I'm going to talk about is how we develop a metric of jobs housing fit. So sort of going beyond this measure of jobs housing balance to look at low-wage jobs, affordable housing fit, and the sort of incremental information that we get from going in that direction. Then I'm going to show some preliminary modeling results that look at the link between jobs housing fit and commute distance, which really drives home the point that there's a sustainability dimension to this problem. And then in the final piece, the first 2 are kind of static pictures of the Bay Area. In the third piece, we got a little bit of funding through Housing and Urban Development to look at recent changes in the Bay Area. So looking at whether jobs housing imbalances are getting sort of better or worse in the recent time period. And there's a lot of concern recently, sort of post-recession, increasing high-wage job growth in the Bay Area, increasing displacement pressures. So we want to sort of get a real-time snapshot of how we're doing in the Bay. So the first piece is this low-wage jobs affordable housing metric. And what I like to do in my work is not just, I like to sort of motivate my work through contact with advocates, because that ensures that it's going to be, that ensures that it's going to matter and it's going to sort of do something in the world. But I also need to think about my research agenda. So it's helpful if I can sort of bring in some research questions to the work. And this piece was no different. So our research questions here were specifically, what is the value added of a low-wage jobs housing fit metric relative to traditional measures of jobs housing balance? And then we want to sort of think about issues of geographic scale and the appropriate affordability threshold. These are in the paper, but I'm not going to go into too much detail here. I gave a little practice talk to my wife yesterday, and she said this part was boring. So I removed it. But if folks are interested in the sort of finer points of distance-based thresholds versus hard buffers, we can talk about those afterwards. So the data sources that we use are pretty interesting. And these are some of the things that are newly available sort of beyond the Census Transportation Planning package. In order to look at jobs and affordable rental units, we need data on those things. Data on jobs comes from the longitudinal employer household dynamics data set. This is a data set that's provided by the US Census. It's updated annually in principle. They just did the release up to 2013, I believe, but for a long time it had been stuck up to 2011. The LHD data has information on locations of jobs, basically across the entire United States, at the census block level. So very fine geographic detail. For folks that don't know, census blocks are sort of the smallest unit of geographic aggregation you get with the census. There are data on jobs by wage category. in the LAHD, and we're going to look at the low wage jobs. These are folks that are earning less than $12.50 a month, or about $15,000 a year. We're going to pair that up with affordable rental units. So we focused on rental units because low wage workers are much more likely to rent than own. And for those data, we looked at the American Community Survey 5-year data. We set a 30% affordability threshold. This is a sort of widely accepted threshold of housing affordability. We assume 2 low-wage workers per household, giving us a threshold affordability amount of about $750. Yeah.
So the affordability threshold holds true for California, just know what your real estate market looks like, it still is pretty good for you.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to use something that was basically a multiple of the wage category in the LAHD. So we didn't really want to play around with that too much. But yeah, and that's because it's such a widely accepted number, it's appropriate to use. But yeah, I think that that's sort of one thing that can be played around with to see how things change. And then in terms of geographic scale, we looked at two geographic scales. One is the jurisdiction. So these are generally cities. There are also some census designated places. And that level is important because jurisdictions control land use. So they can say, we want a zone for more affordable housing. So it's important to sort of understand the imbalances at that scale because they can actually do something to rectify it. We also looked at the neighborhood level, operationalized as a census tract plus a sort of buffer around the census tract, because it's possible that what would appear to be balanced at the jurisdiction level, especially if the jurisdiction is large, could mask sort of neighborhood level imbalances. And we wanted to kind of think about, okay, what is, if we have this sort of small buffer around a census tract, can we think about balanced areas as being sort of pedestrian and non-motorized owner-friendly places? Okay, so the first question is to think about the value added of the low-wage jobs affordable housing metric over and above static measures of jobs housing balance, or sort of traditional measures of jobs housing balance. So what I'm showing here is sort of zoom in on the Sacramento metropolitan region, and I've calculated jobs housing balance at the tract level. So our jobs housing balance measure is just total jobs divided by total housing units for each census tract. And our color scheme here, red is bad. That's more than 4 jobs per housing unit. That means there's many more jobs than housing units. Green is good. We've got about 1 to 2 jobs per housing unit, and we're going to say that that's basically balanced. Yellow is sort of getting bad, potentially in the danger zone, and blue has less jobs, more housing than jobs. So this is the picture using the straight balance measure. If we instead look at low-wage jobs and affordable housing, we see quite a different picture, right? So places like Roseville and Folsom, these are places that are sort of, the affordable housing advocates working in these areas know that these places have problems with affordable housing provision, but weren't able to sort of make the argument that there is actually a problem with using data until Chris and I kind of came along and developed this metric. So quite a different picture in Sacramento. We ran the numbers for the entire state. There's about 7,500 census tracts in California that have data. We can look at the distribution of the scores on the balance measure and compare it to the fit measure. So what I'm showing here is a sort of density plot of jobs housing balance versus jobs housing fit here. So balance is green, fit is orange. And the important takeaway point here is that the balance measure sort of clusters around 1 across most census tracts in California, meaning that it's going to indicate there's basically no problem for the most part. Things appear to be balanced. But if we look at the low-wage fit, there's much more variation. So in fact, many tracts in California evidence very poor fit on that metric. So if we relied only on balance, we would completely miss this picture. So we think that we're adding quite a bit of value looking at low-wage jobs, affordable housing fit. So it's sometimes helpful to look at a map of an area that I'm familiar with. This is the San Francisco Bay Area. So for folks that don't know, there's sort of San Francisco right here. Go down the peninsula, get into San Jose, this is kind of Silicon Valley area. And then these areas are kind of more affluent suburbs into Concord and Walnut Creek and Pleasanton. That's the city that I talked about earlier with the housing cap. The hash lines indicate our effort at kind of representing the margins of error inherent in the ACE NCTS data. But the important takeaways here are that our fit metric shows substantial imbalances in Silicon Valley and into the East Bay. So these results have actually been used for affordable housing advocacy. I have one slide at the end where I'll show some concrete ways they've been used. Some folks are often surprised that San Francisco pops up as like being mostly okay. I think there are a couple reasons for that. One is that San Francisco has a high minimum wage rate at the city level, so that pushes a lot of jobs out of that lower wage tier. There's also rent controls and sort of a generally high supply of rental housing. And then these data are from 2011, so a lot of the changes that have been happening sort of really currently, seeing some of those massive increases in rent prices. So we may not be capturing those in these data. I have another slide later that I'll show that indicates that might in fact be the case. These are the results at the neighborhood level, so calculating for jobs that fit for census tracts, and we see basically a similar picture. We tried to do a little bit of fancier visualization here. So the darker shades indicate tracts that have more jobs. So calling our attention basically to tracts that are potentially more important from an employment perspective. So that's our metric of low-wage jobs housing fit. Now the question that people always ask when Chris and I first developed this is like, okay, well, does it matter? So I started thinking about ways of trying to tie this to some kind of outcome metric. Can we start to test whether places that have better fit actually have improved environmental outcomes? So to do that piece, we needed some measure of commute distance. Okay, so this is a variable that's sort of been tested in the literature in the past. We wanted to sort of build off of that. Ideally, I think we would look at vehicle miles traveled, but we don't have mode share data in the LEHD data set. I think there might be an opportunity to kind of peel off modal origin destination matrices from the LEHD data, but I'm not quite there yet. But the LEHD, in addition to having location on workers and jobs, also has origin destination matrices, so huge OD matrices at the census block level for the entire United States. So we can use those to look at where people are commuting from and to. So I took that big OD table, looked at every census tract, got a population-weighted centroid as kind of the center of activity, and then I just calculated a straight line distance to every other block in the state, and I calculated a weighted average commute distance for every census tract. So looking at where workers are coming in to each of those census tracts from across the state to get a sort of representative number of average commute distance for workers coming to that tract. So I did that across California. And then our important independent variables were these balance and fit metrics. We want to see if those help to predict commute distance. But there are a number of other things that we know affect commute distance, measures of urban form. So I went to the EPA Smart Location Database, which is a really nice data set. Has a bunch of urban form variables sort of in the 5D category. Design, distance of transit, destination accessibility. There are 2 more as well. Where are they? Anyway, you'll see the ones that I used. So these are the regression results. We just did an ordinary least squares regression so far, and there are 2 models. One of total commute distance, so we want to look at whether jobs housing balance, overall balance, predicts commute distance. So that the dependent variables at the top in blue. And then the second model is looking at whether low wage commute distance is predicted by the low wage jobs housing fit metric. And indeed we find that all the variables I'm showing here are significant at the 5% level. Most of them, I think all of them actually are more significant than that. Jobs housing balance is positively associated with commute distance, and low wage jobs housing fit is positively associated with low wage commute distance. So as that fit measure worsens, people have to come in from further away. So that's sort of the direction that we would expect. And then a number of the urban form variables are also associated with the dependent variable in the expected direction. So things like employment density is positively associated with commute distance. So people are sort of more willing to travel from further away to areas that have sort of high density and low wage employment. Household density and road network density are negatively associated with commute distance. So these could be measures of urban form, sort of indicate pedestrian friendliness, proximity of destinations. And then nearby transit frequency, somewhat surprisingly positively associated with commute distance, but we can imagine that if we have nearby transit that's sort of convenient, people might be more willing to locate further away from that job. The transit commute might be less onerous. Included dummy variables as well for urban and suburban locations based on some thresholds included in the Smart Location Database. So these are relative to rural locations, and those are negative, as we would expect. Another surprising result is that the suburban dummy variables are more negative than the urban ones, potentially indicating that there's suburban employment centers in California are pretty important. Anyway, these are preliminary results, so I look forward to kind of discussing them with some of you in the future. They're contained in a TRD paper as well, if folks are interested in that, in looking at the actual coefficients. The R-squareds are low, but I think acceptable for this type of stuff. R-squared for the overall balance model is 0.26, for the low wage model is 0.29. So my initial hypothesis was that the jobs housing balance measure wouldn't be significant at all, and we would just see significance in the low wage commute distance, but that's in fact not the case. They both seem to matter. The low wage model performs somewhat better, has these additional variables we expect to be significant, and the R-squared is slightly higher. But I do need to do a little bit of model tweaking, I think. There's probably some spatial dependence here that I'm not going to take care of, but will in the future. Okay, so the last piece of work, as I mentioned, the first two are kind of static shots of the Bay Area. What's going on right now, what's happening in California. People involved in the Regional Prosperity Plan were interested in looking at what's been the recent change over time. Are these things sort of getting better or worse in the short term? So we went back to the LAHT data and cut up the numbers slightly differently to make some visualizations that describe changes in the housing and job markets. And we wanted to look at a couple of different things. One is this argument, this sort of supply side argument. People, I don't know if this is made across the country, but people in the Bay Area are generally of this mind that actually we shouldn't concentrate on providing affordable housing. We just need to provide more housing in general. That will relieve market pressure. Prices will come down for everyone. We'll sort of get affordable housing for everyone, and it'll be awesome. Free markets, great. We wanted to see if there was any basis for that. If that was actually happening. We also wanted to identify high and low performers, similar to the jobs housing fit metric. And then we have some preliminary investigation of commute distance implications for new workers in the Bay Area that we can get from the LAHT data as well. There's a pretty nice result there. And again, to examine recent changes. So we looked at the ACS 3-year data. Now what happens with the ACS data is as you go to sort of the shorter time periods, you lose jurisdictions because you're basing it on a smaller sample size, the errors get really big, and the Census Bureau doesn't even include data for some jurisdictions. So all we get using the 3-year data are 19 jurisdictions in the Bay that have consistent housing data available. And this is a lot of places. It accounts for about 60% of the total jobs. You'll see though that over the time period that we looked at, the actual number of jobs changing is really only significant or substantively meaningful for the big 3 cities. So the big 3 cities in the Bay Area are San Francisco, San Jose, and Oakland. And they account for about 1/3 of total jobs and about 1/3 of the population. So these are, they're super important. So this first figure is showing change in total jobs on the x-axis over those two kind of 3-year periods that I showed, and change in total housing units on the y-axis. And I've sort of pointed up San Jose, San Francisco, and Oakland. So our takeaway here is that, okay, total jobs are going up, sure. They're going up faster than housing units, but these places are generally adding lots of total housing units. So these are charts that the sort of supply side folks like to see. Total jobs are growing, total housing units are growing, great. But what Chris and I have been doing, our sort of whole argument is that you need to disaggregate these things to sort of make sense of whether growth by job type is matching growth in housing units by affordability level. So this figure is showing change in low-wage jobs on the x-axis and change in affordable rental units. So similar to the variables that we were using to calculate the jobs housing fit metric. I should mention also these gray sort of error bars are just based on the ACS data. I believe it's a 90% confidence interval. So if it crosses over 0, we can't really say if it's positive or negative. The thing to point out here is that San Francisco is a huge outlier. San Francisco added high numbers of low-wage jobs, but probably lost total affordable rental units. Oakland didn't really have much change, also probably lost or didn't change its number of total rental units. San Jose similarly lost sort of net low-wage jobs without adding any affordable rental units. So these are net changes in jobs. We wanted to think about, okay, what are the environmental implications of these changes? So we looked at the locations where new workers were being added. So we can compare the OD matrix from the recent period to the OD matrix from the previous period and look at those census tracts that are actually adding workers and then calculate commute distances for those new workers relative to the existing sort of commute distribution. And we get this pretty stark result, which is that we've got 3 income categories here. So low-wage workers are green dots on the far right here. Middle-wage workers are the orange dots in the middle, and then high-wage workers are the blue dots on the left. And we can see that the sort of incremental commute distance for low-wage workers commuting into San Francisco, San Jose, and Oakland is actually quite high, and it's higher than that for high-wage workers. So it seems very likely that this failure to provide housing that's affordable for low-wage workers is leading to increasing commute distances. Okay, so lending some support to the cross-sectional data that I showed previously. So some key points that I think we can take away from actually all these pieces of work. One is that if we look at aggregate housing production, or if we look at sort of aggregate totals of jobs or housing units, that's definitely going to hide disparities that become evident when we look by affordability level. There's some worrying evidence of long commute distances for new low-wage workers. I think I have to investigate this a little further. There were definitely some of the commute flows that are predicted in the LEHD data. Have you used these data, Giovanni? LEHD? No. Some of the commute flows that are predicted are kind of odd, like people commuting from Los Angeles to San Francisco, that I don't know whether they're real. So I need to kind of dig into this a little more and talk to the Census Bureau. But we can importantly update these annually to track progress. So Chris actually emailed me the other day to sort of update these data using the new 2013 numbers. I told him I don't have time to do that, but I will do it. And because I have my open source R scripts, I can just sort of turn the crank, pull all the data off the internet, and generate new figures. So it's pretty nice. I promised that I would show an example of how this has been used in practice. There's a regional transportation planning effort in the Bay Area called Plan Bay Area that was adopted in 2013. It's an integrated transportation land use scenario. There was one scenario that was proposed called the equity, environment, and jobs scenario. And one of the sort of design principles of that scenario was to locate affordable housing in high opportunity suburbs. And that sort of along with a bunch of other different strategies resulted in the EEJ scenario being the environmentally superior alternative. And I think one of the cool things about this scenario, I was involved with the people that were kind of pushing for this, was that it demonstrates this convergence of equity and sustainability. So we can get these equity outcomes that we want along with sustainability. And in some cases it can be a win-win. There are a number of limitations to the data sets. One, in the analysis, one is that the LEHD wage thresholds that I mentioned, those low, middle, and high wage categories, are static. They don't change over time. So the number of workers in the low wage category is going to sort of decrease just as a side effect of inflation. It's not really clear how we're going to deal with that going forward. As I mentioned, there's no modal information in the origin destination data. So all I have information on is commute distances. I don't know whether those are translating into GDTs or greenhouse gas emissions. I just sent in a proposal proposing to do some more work with the OD matrices from the LEHD. And I think we might be able to estimate some kind of like aggregate load choice model to split off OD matrices. I'm not exactly sure. That might be one way we can go forward with that. Another limitation is that I use rental units only, and this is super important in the Bay Area, but if we're doing this in rural Texas or somewhere that has quite a different housing market, we probably want to look also at owned units. Owned units are a little problematic. We've done some work with them, but then you have to make assumptions about sort of mortgage rates, what those are going to be, payback periods, etc. So rental units are sort of more straightforward to work with, but maybe not the best. So to conclude, Our fit metric identifies very poor, low-wage jobs, affordable housing fit. One of the reviewers was really mad because we had initially called it just jobs housing fit, but he was like, he or she was just like, this is actually a low-wage jobs, affordable housing fit metric. So I'm trying to talk about that, but it's really enough. So there's poor fit, Silicon Valley in the peninsula, in the eastern suburbs, showing some evidence that it's related to increased commute distance, so making that link between equity and sustainability. A number of steps for future work. I think there's some clear things I need to do to basically make the modeling better. We can look at alternative affordability thresholds, potentially as Catherine mentioned, and then also keep updating this continuously over time. So here are my acknowledgements. Chris and I wrote up the regional prosperity plan, so there's a report for that last piece. The first piece is in press at Urban Geography, and then the second piece is a TRD paper. So there's stuff written about all this work. If people are interested, I'm happy to share those with you. And I can take any questions now. You can ask me anything.
We'll start asking you something. So very interesting presentation, Alexa. I've never used the ADHD data set, so I was wondering, your unit of analysis is the census tract, right? On the census tract. You don't have access to the individual records, you know what each person is doing, right?
No, but if you go to the secure census data facility, you can get access to those individual records. But the base unit of analysis is the census block in LHD, and you can add it up to whatever you need.
So the models that you were showing, for instance, were the two models for the unit instance, those are like the unit of analysis is the census tract. The other thing I was thinking, so for the modeling assumptions, there was a simple linear regression model I think you did, and probably you have some plans to develop additional models. Have you tested like transformation of the variables? You mentioned with probably log transform into the distance.
No, but some of them probably should be log transformed. Also, it's not clear whether the relationship with the dependent variable is linear, so I might consider doing categories with the fit measure as well. Yeah, there's definitely more that can be done there. Yeah, tested transformations. Some of the independent variables are not linear.
Yeah, we mentioned that. Starting from the different variable.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the biggest problem is that there's definitely spatial dependence, and so I need to do some kind of spatial dependence estimation. But I just haven't done that.
And also that funding, like between the suburban and urban, you were mentioning distances tend to be longer for urban actually.
Yeah.
So that could be like something related to spatial dependence, or it could be funding actually related to the.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I'm planning to do is kind of dig in more and look at kind of maybe not estimating sub-regional models, but looking at what's going on at kind of each region. So looking at LA, looking at San Francisco, looking at the San Joaquin Valley, to see if there are sort of different relationships that emerge. Yeah.
I was curious, is there any evidence to show that perhaps in other cities where there's some sort of fit or balance between low-wage jobs and low-wage housing, that people who have those kind of jobs or housing will actually live closer to those areas or prefer to live in other places?
Yeah, in the paper we reference some literature that looks at exactly that issue. I mean, there's the one sort of argument that I make about that usually is that if you're a low-wage person, living closer to where you work is going to reduce your transportation costs, and that's going to be very attractive to you because you don't have that much money. So you want to save that additional dollar by moving closer to where you work. If you're a higher income person, it's likely that other things are going to be super important for your locational choice, things like school quality, neighborhood amenities, just sort of raw housing size. You know, there's evidence that higher income people want to consume more housing, so they're going to sort of locate further from city centers where housing is cheaper per unit. So I think sort of from first principles, there's kind of argument that low-wage workers will more readily locate close to their jobs. And I can share those references with you. Yeah.
Are you planning on looking at the data here in Atlanta?
Yeah, I mean, I need to, maybe this is something that you'll have to help me with. I need to sort of get tapped into the advocacy networks here and figure out what people are working on and what people are concerned with. I mean, I have the names of individual organizations, and I just need to reach out to folks. But yeah, if there's sort of an interest in doing something like this here, then I would definitely do it. I do a lot of work on like transit equity also, so I think that's really a sort of pertinent issue here. I'm planning to extend my work in that direction. But yeah, I love to do stuff locally. I love to work with local folks to basically see that what I'm doing is meaningful and can make a difference. Yeah.
So you mentioned basically the Supreme Court case, so the Federal Housing Act. So I'm really interested in how, because what this did is it was, the phrase you would use was the exact right one, where before you had to show that you intentionally had this disproportionate effect, but now it can be just sort of
Disparate
an accident,
impact.
disparate impact, right? So one of the things that I'm trying to learn about from a policy perspective is what this sort of empowers people to do in saying, well, look, like this is the case now. So how do you see this intersecting with the Federal Housing Act? Does this help people make the case that there's disparate impact?
Yeah, I mean, so this definitely helps with, I mean, I guess I'm not familiar enough with the intricacies of the Federal Housing Act, the Fair Housing Act, to know exactly how this fits in. But I think the important piece of this work is that it really says, it makes a normative statement. It says, we, in places that have low-wage jobs, we also need to have affordable housing units. The Fair Housing Act is more about locating affordable housing sort of in general, not considering where jobs are located. And I think Justice Kennedy, in the opinion, tried to basically say that intuitively we know that we haven't been locating affordable housing in areas of high opportunity, and so we want to do that. So that's sort of a goal of the ruling, I think, is that we want people to have access to good jobs, good education, good schools, whatever, and we haven't been doing that in the past. And it's, I mean, this work, the results really highlight, okay, these are the areas that are super deficient. And we know that they comport with areas that have been identified by advocates as having an affordable housing problem. But there wasn't, the data just weren't there to make the argument for it. So now we can use this analysis, make those arguments, and potentially target affordable housing for those areas. So I guess in talking it out, it does seem like it's pretty well matched. I don't think that there was like a particular analytical tool or a set of data or a metric that they proposed in a ruling that would sort of get us towards this. But I feel like to the extent that we can target affordable housing to these areas that have imbalances, we will advance the goals of the Fair Housing Act.
Because your funder is US HUD, so I'm wondering if you could use those connections to sort of leverage larger testing of this new metric.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely interest in the other folks that are up here, public advocates. They're a nonprofit legal firm in the Bay Area, and they've been interested in this idea of affirmatively furthering fair housing even before the Supreme Court ruling. So I think, I mean, this is sort of the first set of results from this stuff. So I think it will definitely do. Yeah.
In your housing job balance analysis, you use thresholds which are based on number of jobs per household. I was wondering if you looked at, for example, number of jobs per worker, or considering the size of the household where the dependents cannot work in the household.
So the metric is just based on total number of jobs and total number of housing units. And then we basically give a range that we think is like okay. So between 1 and 2, we're saying is probably fine. So we don't actually make any assumptions about like how many people live in a particular housing unit. or don't, or is it dependent or what. It just, the more assumptions we make, I think those things get more difficult to justify. So yeah, it's just between 1 and 2, we think is probably okay. And that sort of comports with the needs of our advocacy partners. We just want to sort of like, okay, this jurisdiction is doing well, or this jurisdiction is doing poorly. Like, how do we
I think we better stop there in the interest of time, but thank you again.